Yeah, that's well, Robin. You know, Eric is in the Serbian forest, but I'm the guy that looks like he just came out of one. So I'm gonna do my best here to try to fix that. Meanwhile, I'm gonna be focusing on volume levels. Seems like you're a little bit low at the moment. We'll get right on that, guys. I have the chat windows open. Be following along. And thanks, guys, for being on the Twitch chat and chess.com/TV. We want to get right into this prediction show for Carlsen against Karjakin, obviously the biggest match of the year, Robin.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking a lot last time. Last time I focused mostly on Karjakin. I don't think is online yet, but I discussed the only game that Karjakin actually ever beat Magnus in classical chess, which was from Day 2012. And I promised the people then that today we're gonna be a little bit more realistic. We're gonna get real. We're gonna talk more about Magnus, why Magnus is going to win this match, because we're not gonna come up here with really surprising predictions. At least not when it comes to the result. Um, Aman, what kind of impact has Magnus made on your chess, and when did you get to know him, and so on? And as we go and talk a little bit about this very special character in chess, the current world champion, I also want to show one more game like I did last time. But first of all, what is Magnus to you, Aman?
Well, Robin, he's obviously sort of catapulted himself into the chess elite like quicker than we've seen anyone, and not only done that but also maintained that spot for so many years now, and that type of consistency, it requires a certain style to stay in the upper echelon of chess. The Not even the upper echelon, the number one spot in chess for so long. You don't really see people posing big threats to him, coming close. I mean, Magnus will lose games, but he doesn't lose matches, and he consistently performs in tournaments. He scores tournament results, victories. So for me, it's really nice to have, first of all, a guy so young at the very top of the list. It does a lot for chess, promotion for chess, advertising, marketing, just having a handsome young face up there in the number one spot. When people think of chess, they think of Magnus Carlsen. And it's definitely changing a few people's perceptions. We'd like to shift it a little more, but having a guy like Magnus, he's got so many years in front of him. So I think he's first of all a good representative and a good ambassador for the game. So that's always nice to see. But for me personally, it's the style of chess that he plays that has at least changed the way that I've thought about chess or even studied chess. He's so human, and of course, everyone's human in the top 10, but he plays so human, and not everyone does. It's a quality that's a little bit rare nowadays, with the computers sort of taking over, and you're able to use them to such effect. Preparation, preparing deep lines, memorization, theory, all of this sort of stuff. It's really impressive how Magnus can maintain the number one spot while not even playing to what should be the best style, the computer era. He plays human moves. He always finds a way to get his positions, the slow moving, small edge, and he just goes for the real pure chess game. So that type of style has made me rethink, what is an advantage? That's the main thing for me. Magnus proves time and time again that something that the computer says is a draw is a human advantage, and that's the most important thing that I've probably learned from him is, what is an advantage really, and things that I've thought were equal before are certainly not.
Right. Well, you covered almost everything there, Amon. I'm really glad that you give such a elaborated answer to that. I completely agree with you about Magnus. The way he also changed my view on chess is that computers are so important, but it's very refreshing that the very best player in the world is actually probably also the player in the top 10, or actually, any top player that cares the least about the computer evaluations. He really, not only does he have this very human style, I think he also have a very human way of working with the computer. He doesn't let the computer affect his way of thinking, the way that other players get affected by it. And getting back a little bit to the match and to Magnus versus Karyakin, last time I wanted to discuss with people how I'm sort of surprised that this match even came to be. Even though these guys are child prodigies, right? I mean, back then I said Karjakin was the youngest grandmaster ever at 12 years old, Magnus at 13. Both prodigies, both very likely to be in the world's elite and in the world top for many years. But in a way, that seems like this match was always meant to be, and this was inevitable. But that's not really the case. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I certainly hear what you're saying, especially when you go back and really think that not Magnus but Karjakin was one of the youngest GMs, right? I mean, the
Uh-huh.
fact that they should both meet after both having the Grandmaster title when I think maybe I was around 1300 there, Robin. Um, the fact that they should meet now is kind of storybook, right? The two youngest grandmasters in the world almost now meet and battle for the world championship. So I certainly agree with you there.
Definitely, and I thought it was quite exciting during the candidates tournament when we had both Karjakin and Fabiano sort of battling it out for that first place. So we knew it was going to be a very young sort of match, right? Um, One thing before I'm gonna also go through the game a little bit together with you, and at that point I would really invite everyone to just shoot some questions at us, shoot questions at Aman, and we'll sort of do it, answer those questions as we go through the game. My personal favorite win from Magnus over Karyakin, but this match, Aman, it only has a prize fund of 1.1 million. Now, I say only like I'm a spoiled brat who expects to earn millions, but as a top chess player. But um, it is significantly lower than the match with Vishy Anand. Is that something that also surprises you? I personally find it incredible that we have such an exciting match with these young guns, and there doesn't seem to be as much sponsorship as in previous matches. How do you feel about that?
Well, Robin, let's not even get into the fact that the worst player on an NHL team probably makes about five times that, because the money in chess, of course, is definitely an issue. But just sticking within the realm of chess and comparing it to past editions, other tournaments, it's definitely not the number one motivation. Let's say the money is obviously very good, but I think there's other motivations here, like obviously just retaining the title itself is probably worth a lot more than that prize fund. To put it in perspective, just kind of like when you're a boxer, just having that clean undefeated record is
Mhm.
worth more than how much money you might take home for the win itself. So in that sense, definitely a bit of disappointment, but I'm not sure that it would necessarily bother guys like Magnus too much because I mean his flow comes from marketing, advertising, all sorts of sponsorships, other methods of earning money. But for Karyakin, he's the guy that probably has to arrange like the biggest team to help him out. Probably just so much money being invested from his side. So he might be thinking about winning the title again a little bit more than the prize fund. I'm just not sure that it plays that much into either of these guys' heads.
Definitely, yeah. I think you're hitting the right spot there. Is sort of that Magnus already has a lot of income from other sources than chess, and I think it's very good that he does that because not every single world champion was as popular, to the bigger audience, and he has the modeling and lots of other stuff going on. And I think Karyakin also can't complain too much. Actually, I think the budget for Karyakin when it comes to preparation of this match is probably bigger than Magnus's because well, after all, he is the Russian challenger, and Russia would like nothing more than taking the crown back to where it belongs, according to them, right?
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely some sort of political stuff involved here, and just the way that Russians sort of dominate chess in every level except the absolute number one spot. They certainly want to take that back to the motherland.
Definitely. Okay. Well, I'm gonna get into the game. This is my personal favorite game, and as I said before, guys, please ask questions. Aman will be following the chat. I'll be following the chat. We might get in. I already see a lot of comments about politics as well, but let's not get into that quite yet. Maybe at the end of the show, we'll briefly, discuss how this politics might affect chess, or maybe just politics in general. But let's start with my favorite game. This one was actually played in 2008, and last time I also took a somewhat older game, 2012. Not only because I think it's interesting to look at some of the history between these guys, but also a lot of the recent games have just been analyzed a lot, not only in terms of the World Championship match, but on a lot of chess websites and so on. So I like to go back in time a little bit before maybe also discussing their most recent game after that. So let's have a look. This is 2008 Ember Melody tournament, a big tournament in Monaco that unfortunately stopped a few years ago. It was sponsored by a Dutch billionaire called Joop van Oostrom, and this is actually a blindfold game. So keep that in mind as we look through the game. One of the most impressive efforts, if you ask me, on Magnus's side, beating of course a very strong already in 2008 Sergei Karjakin. So let's see. It was a Sicilian Najdorf, which is really a signature opening of Karjakin, I would say, but unfortunately, the last couple of years, we haven't seen as much Sicilians of Sergei as he used to play, right, Amon? Most of these guys don't go for these risky openings as much as we would like them to play them.
Yeah, and I can't say that we're going to see any change in that with something like a world championship coming up. I don't think anyone's going to be taking unnecessary risks.
Definitely. I think last match there was this one Sicilian game where Vichy went for a Khan Sicilian, which was like the biggest surprise. I would have put a lot of money on not seeing a Sicilian in that match. So never say never, but I do agree it's very unlikely. Um, let's have a look. So Magnus plays the Bishop E2 variation. Um, Not the most theoretical variation, but there are still a couple of tricky lines here. Karjakin answers with E5, the main line. And what we see here is already a sideline by Magnus. And also in the previous game that I discussed that Magnus lost, again, we see Magnus going for some sort of a sideline. And this is also signature style Magnus. He doesn't that often go into the most topical theoretical lines. He likes to look for older lines or slightly new ideas, but not necessarily new ideas that are gonna, blow you out of the water right away. He just wants to get a good game going, and in this case, he went for this Bishop G5 variation, which really shouldn't promise White much of an advantage, but it does get, an interesting game going. So what do we see? He gives up the bishop, and of course the fight here is over the d5 square, and it almost resembles more of a Sveshnikov type of position already than a real Najdorf. It's definitely much more positional than a lot of the other Najdorf lines.
It's interesting already that you see one of these like typical Magnus ideas, like who would just play Bishop G5, Bishop takes F6, like unprovoked, just give up what's arguably the best bishop. It's interesting. He's going for a purely positional, simple approach, and he
Yep.
knows which ones are he's able to make work.
Yeah, actually, that's something I want to discuss later as well, stylistically, because we can, of course, try to predict a little bit in what sort of course the game should take for both Karjakin and for Magnus to be at their very best. But I think we're gonna see some of that in this game. So let's move on. Long castle, putting pressure on d6. I personally think Queen b6 over here is a very decent move, counter-attacking on f2. It's a little bit more sharp. In the game, Karjakin goes for knight b4, and I actually think that it's precisely this type of decision I'm on that Karjakin is going to think a lot about, not only during the games that he's going to play against Magnus, but already before the match. It will be such a difficult decision in many positions. Am I going to try and trade pieces and sort of hold the draw and maybe take a slightly worse position as a result? Because very often when you're trying to force exchanges and force the position to sort of die down a little bit, that will have some, adverse consequences, let's say. And we see that in this game as well. I think that's really a difficult choice for many players. When you kind of want to take the game into already drawish territory, because hey, you're playing Magnus with black draws a great result, but at the same time you're giving them this little nagging edge that we see actually appearing in the following position with opposite color bishops. Um, Before I'm going to explain why this position is already quite pleasant for White, and of course we're going to see how Magnus builds on that, how do you feel about these types of positions appearing in the match I'm on? Just these little advantages. Do you feel that Karjakin is going to take a very dynamic approach and try to, at all costs, not get into something like this, even though he is a good defender? Or do you think that he's actually been working on defending slightly worse positions and just sort of feeling confident that he can hold on no matter what, pretty much?
Well, Robin, it's pretty interesting because we might be privy to one of the most interesting matches in the sense that it feels to me like Magnus is one of the best, if not the best player in the world at milking or squeezing the smallest of advantages into a win, or just putting enough practical pressure that a position that you might think is equal, or opposite bishops, equal pawns, you might not even glance at it and just think it's a draw. But Magnus is a specialist at turning those into victories. On the other hand, Karjakin is actually what I would consider arguably one of the toughest, most resilient defenders in chess currently. Like his ability to play specifically these type of positions with black is kind of unbelievable. I time and time again see Karjakin, just his typical Queen's Indian, just some small edge that it just looks like you wouldn't want to play his position, and you find out 10 moves later he's earned a draw. And that's not because his opponents are giving him a draw. They just he's able to hold, and the hardest thing to do in chess when you have a tough position sometimes is to shuffle. And
Mhm.
I've seen so many games where Karyakin, he sits there, he admits, he says, I'm a little bit worse, but he just shuffles his pieces. And sometimes that's the worst thing to play against. You can't break through until your opponent makes a mistake. Karyakin sits there, he doesn't make mistakes, he just shuffles. And it's going to be really interesting, a total style clash between. I think we are going to see a lot of these positions. I can't see Karyakin, being so afraid that he's going to change his entire style. That would surprise me for a big world championship match, but it does mean that it's basically his word against Magnus's. Magnus is going to be happy to have these, and apparently so is Karyakin. So it's really going to be up to the gameplay at the end of the day, because I think we are going to see a lot of these small edge for white. Magnus is happy versus it's almost equal, and Karyakin is happy to defend. So it should be interesting.
Definitely, I agree with you. I think that it's unlikely Karyakin, not only that he thinks about turning around his entire strategy compared to what he usually does, it also maybe just isn't quite enough time to go through such a change in approach, because this is really what brought him where he is right now, and probably it is the best strategy to just build on those skills and improve them even more before the match. Specifically studying Magnus's games and how exactly he tries to push an edge and increase pressure and so on. Okay, in this game, the following happened. He castled, and actually here it's interesting. I would have personally played h4, already limiting this bishop a little bit. Obviously, you don't really want to take it because my queen would move over to the h file and it would directly cause some problems. Sort of at least a very dangerous looking attack.
Mm-hmm.
I can also play g3. Just to give you an example, let's say you check and I have to move my bishop to h6. I think definitely this is not worth doing for black. Not only are you not really a pawn up because d4 is hanging, also your bishop is having a lot of trouble ever getting out of this as long as the rook is on h1.
Yeah.
So h4 would be sort of a poisoned pawn, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And after that, maybe follow up with g3 and hope to set up an attack on the king side later on in the game. Magnus didn't play it. He went for queen f3. Also logical, I think. He wants to move the bishop to d3. Of course, white should watch out for black playing d3 and activating that bishop. So it's logical to have some piece there. Right now, it would just cost him a pawn, so it's nothing to worry about. Karjakin, actually, I would say true to his style, just sees an opportunity to reduce pressure, and he exchanges the queen by the following sequence, and Magnus trades. Rook to e1, rook to e8, takes. I'm going through this a little quickly, but I think we all see what's happening. A lot of pieces are being traded. And you might ask yourself, well, Robin, like, what's interesting about this game? Isn't this going exactly, the boring sort of way that we sometimes see the highest level player games end in? Not really, not really. And the next move, Magnus plays something that I think both Aman and I like a lot. When you have these opposite color bishops, it's very common that you put your pawns on the square of your opponent's bishop, and the idea is to uh, limit the scope of that bishop. And of course, the other side of it, that in the long term, maybe the opponent's bishop will be able to attack your pawns, but as we can see, that will be very difficult. In fact, already here, Aman, I'm starting to think to myself, like, how much does Black like the fact that he has this pawn on d4? Because it really renders his bishop kind of useless right now. I mean, imagine he could go bishop d8, bishop b6, then at least he already has a bit of a scope on those pawns on the king side, right? But for the moment, Black is looking pretty passive.
Yeah, no, you're gonna see. This game is a nice example of pretty much how to play. What's a really common position is not just opposite bishops, but opposite bishops when rooks are on the board, because the winning chances that are offered with just that rook being on the board are quite serious. It means that a lot of the times where you would just sit there and shuffle, suddenly you have the rook to be active with. So Magnus is sort of shutting down the bishop with his pawns, and meanwhile you see what he did, which is something that most people might not do. A couple moves ago, he played rook takes e8, and it might strike some people as a super strange move, because why on earth would I'm controlling the e file? Why would I give up control of the only open file on the whole board? And it's really because Magnus understands that that's an irrelevant open file. Put your rook on e5. I'm going to stop it with f4. Put your rook on e3. I'm going to let you stay there. I don't care. Basically, he's going to play like maybe king d2 and rook b1 and b4 b5, something like that. Activate his own rook. So he's understanding that the e file isn't important in opposite bishop endgames, because as long as the open file doesn't offer any serious invasion points, you're just going to use that extra rook and try to open some other lines.
Exactly. Yeah, you're right. Also, I think it's instructive that one pair of rooks is enough to really keep a lot of pressure here. Now, if we would change another pair, this would probably be a real draw, right? Because we just don't have the firepower to really cause problems. But as we'll see, with one rook on the board, there's still a lot to play for. So f4, Black plays g6. I was personally wondering for a sec, why doesn't he immediately go for more exchanges? Well, Magnus would have taken, and as you indicated, it's still not that easy to create play over the e file over here. So I don't think this is really a solution to Black's problems. Also note that, for example, if you go rook e5, rook takes d5, it might work in some cases, but imagine I play something like, let's say a4, then taking this would already result in losing the b pawn, right? So it really isn't so easy. Another idea is rook to f1 here, when again you want to take my pawn, but now f7 is hanging, right? And both of these pawns, b7, f7, are probably more important than the d5 pawn. So no direct way for Black to equalize over here. But Karjakin doesn't care too much. He just plays g6. And now another move, b4. And this is really something that, like we indicated before, right, Amon, putting the pawns on the squares of your opponent bishop. And I think this is another really nice example. Obviously, White is trying to open up a second front, right, on the queen side.
Yep.
So, king to f8, pretty passive defense. King to b2, king to e7, and okay, it passive in a sense that it doesn't directly try to equalize, but he's just trying to bring his king over to the queen side, where he now sees that there might be some action going on. King 3, rook to c8, and now g4. The reason he plays g4 now, I think, Amon, is that in a position like this, I think Magnus probably was afraid that if the king moves, suddenly rook e3 becomes a lot more dangerous, right? Because the rook actually has only 2 squares, but either on f3 or on h3, that would really change the sort of approach to this position, because that's a real counterplay. That's immediately attacking at least one pawn, and that's not something, at least at some point, probably Magnus is going to allow some counterplay, but he wants to improve his position as much as possible before having to really think about that. So what do we see? King to b3, rook to c8, and g4 now. And of course, now that the rook has moved from the e file, this is not such a big problem anymore. And over here, Karjakin played bishop h4 check. Rook c3 check you can play, but after king b2, your rook probably is going to have to move back, right? Yeah. It doesn't have all that much to do on c3. And of course, over here, bishop to f2, bishop e3. Oh, bishop to e3 would be perfect for Black. Again, if you allow Black's bishop to go to e3, where it's very active, probably we can more or less agree to a draw, right, Amon?
Yeah. Once we've committed this pawn to g4, I guess it's important to realize that the pawn on f4 is no longer staple there. We can't play g3 to support it. Whereas bishop on e3 is either going to force our rook to stay on f1 the whole game, or we're going to have to play f5. And like you were saying, you want those pawns on dark squares, not light squares, if you can have it your way.
All right. In the meantime, Amon, someone asked, Magnus does not seem to have many seconds. How do you think this is going to affect the overall World Championship match? Now, I think we both know at least of a couple of seconds, right? And I think it's not entirely true that he doesn't take anyone's advice or he doesn't have any help, right?
Yeah.
He does actually have a pretty decent team, but his approach to seconds is a little bit different than most players, right?
Well, it's true that his approach to chess is also a little bit different than most players. So I guess that sort of requires the same type of screening for his seconds as well.
Yeah, I think especially when he tries to work with someone else, he really has a very clear idea of what that person can bring to him, other than just sitting behind the computer and analyzing lines day and night. Like some of the other top players, obviously they have just people who do the computer work, right? Just the space bar, a lot of lines. I don't think Magnus is really a player who's looking for people who are particularly good at that. He has more specific goals in mind when he takes seconds on. At least I feel that way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, moving on. Rook to f1 stops this idea. King to d7, rook to f3, and now we're already threatening rook h3, rook takes h7. Slightly passive reply by Karjakin, but at the same time it will be hard to defend h7 without just playing rook h8. Otherwise, the alternative would maybe be h6, rook h3, g5, but that clearly limits the bishop on h4 a lot. It's not easy to get it out of there without weakening your pawn structure with taking on f4. To h8, rook to h3, bishop f6, g5, bishop g7. Now, Aman, I have a question for you. If you were to play as white here, do you already feel like is the win already on your mind here, or are you still thinking to yourself like, yeah, this is going sort of well, but I don't know if this is going to be enough? How would you approach this position at this point in the game?
Well, I think I would be leaning slightly more towards your first comment, which is that it's not winning, but I'm playing my moves with a lot more confidence, like as if the direction I'm going is very positive. So I think that's mostly because I would look at this position and compare it to the position I had maybe 10 moves ago, where I had just played maybe rook takes e8, let's say. And I would think, wow, in that time, my rook has come to h3, my king to b3, my pawns to g5, f4, b4, and what has my opponent done in the meantime? I mean, pretty much none of his pieces have improved, and in fact, almost all of them are worse than when we last saw them. So just looking at it from that standpoint, I would feel pretty confident, but I've played enough of these types of positions where you're trying to squeeze an advantage to know that it's never over until it's over. So I would never think that it's in the bag, but I would certainly be feeling good about the progress.
Same. I feel the same way about this. Actually, if I would be playing this against a strong player, I still wouldn't think that this is that I'm likely to win. I feel that the draw is still closer than a white win, but definitely, like you said, white's going into the right direction. I just think all of these things that might seem a little easy to some players or not that difficult. Like, yeah, he puts his pawns on these squares. Yeah, he puts some pressure. Yeah, he brings the king to b3. But don't forget that he had a lot of subtleties that he had to consider, and this is actually a blindfold game. Now, Aman, you and I actually have had some blindfold battles, and I think our games are pretty high quality, but I don't think that either of us are capable of, really thinking through some of these things like, oh, when do I go for g4 because rook e3 is coming and so on.
Yeah.
Already this is just so impressive to me, right?
The maximum level I would have in a blindfold game is like playing a move like f4 and putting it on a dark square. But then there's so many things like you're mentioning that we're looking at now. This game was played like 7 years ago blindfold, and we're looking at it now and still impressed with the technique.
Definitely, yeah. All right, let's see how he goes on. So he's put the pressure on the h-pawn. Now time to move the rook back to f3. Obviously, f5 is always something to consider now. And the first question I had here is actually what happens after h6, right? because h6 is actually the move that activates Black's rook, and I'm surprised Karjakin didn't play it. And again, we'll see something that I feel that Karjakin has this sort of style that let me put it in a simple way. I think he likes to go passive a little faster than most other players, and we'll see what I mean exactly in the next move. If h6 would have been played, it's actually an instructive line. So you go rook to f1, pretty much anticipating anyway black should take at some point on g5. Now, if he would play this and defend his pawn on f7, for a minute it looks like black has done everything right. Now our pawns are both actually sort of weak. Not entirely clear what we're doing. Our own attack on the queen side seems slow, but that's not the case. After king to a4, it becomes very difficult to suddenly stop this king from marching in. And we'll see sort of a pawn run starting over here. The big difference is that if black picks up, let's say, this last pawn, he's even the first one to sort of start running, but as we'll see, black has almost no access to the b pawn and the a pawn. It's very hard to get there because there's sort of a blockade by the white bishop. So you'd have to go all the way rook h5, rook h8, and then only your rook would be there, right? Pretty much white's winning here because black's pawns are actually not going very fast. All the white pieces are protecting against this, right?
Yeah.
So, and the same if he takes on d5. Again, it's not a very important pawn. You just take and you start running. This is probably the moment that whether we're playing blindfold or not, Aman and I both would think like, yeah, it's in the bag finally,
Yeah,
right?
I got it.
But okay, he played another move, Aman, and he actually played the move f5. Now, maybe I'm making too many generalizations over here, but f5 is like one of those moves that also I would probably never play, but it might be a decent move. But I think it's striking that Karjakin goes for a decision like this in a blindfold game. So, do you think that says something about his character as a chess player, about his style?
Well, I think a lot of players, when they have a style, let's say Mamed Yarov is a pretty good example because he's one of those live by the sword but die by the sword kind of players. That Mamed Yarov, he can play some of the craziest, most beautiful attacking games we've seen, but he can also just lose games in like 15 moves to topical theory or something like that. But when he's in his element, he's very on point. He looks unstoppable. Karjakin, I think he's the same way with his passive style, that he doesn't like to take, as you said, a move earlier, like this h6. It might not seem like a risk to most people, but Karjakin is one of those guys where he feels like if he doesn't see a breakthrough, he's not going to create another weakness or an opening. He's going to sit there and just say, look, I don't see how you can break through, so I'm going to trust my instinct and just hold. I'm just going to shuffle and wait. Now, when you're playing a guy like Carlsen, the more, let's say you have that choice every 5 moves, do I go aggressive, do I go passive? If he keeps making that passive decision, I feel like against a guy like Carlsen, it adds up. It's like a small advantage shift every time he makes that choice, and you have to be careful. Karjakin is so good at adding those up to a sizable advantage, so it could be that, in this case, f5 is the smarter move, but when you're playing a guy like Magnus, he's going to put pressure if you keep doing that.
Exactly, yeah. In the meanwhile, there is one question that I think is interesting to answer him on. Magnus's rating, okay, at the time this game was played, I think Karjakin was around 2710, 2720. Mind you, this is 2008, so that means it would have been a slightly bit higher than it is now. Magnus around 2740, but someone says Magnus actually had 2880 before, right? That was his crazy peak.
Yeah.
And right now it's around 2850. How much does his rating fluctuation, and perhaps also Karjakin's rating fluctuation, how representable is that of how strong they are? Does it mean that when he had 2880 that he was a stronger player than he is now?
It's definitely a good question because we often look at the ratings, especially in chess, to just determine who's better and who's worse. Especially because a lot of people, let's say who don't follow chess so much, are currently looking at the World Championship match and wondering, wait a minute, why is Magnus Carlsen playing the 9th highest rated guy in the world? Because in most other sports, or the way most people would think of it is like number 1 plays number 2, right? That's the obvious way of thinking of it. So it is a bit surprising at times, and the short answer that I would give is no, he wasn't stronger when he was 2880. But it did show us like a certain capability that he has. Like it showed us that he can reach that level, and I think chess it's all about different plateaus. So right now he's sort of proving that 2850 is kind of his plateau area. He's maintaining that, which is incredible in the current
Right.
competition. But he showed just for a brief moment that 2880 is realistic, and the more often he can sort of make that jump and go back down, the slowly I think his plateau is just going to increase. 2860, 2870, if he can maintain that. Now it's obviously going to take a long time, but I think that was just a glimpse into a higher level that he can play at. But it doesn't necessarily mean he was playing stronger there. There's a lot of things like luck, good fortune, mistakes, and everything that come into play. But I don't think he was stronger there necessarily.
Right. I completely agree with you. I think that, this, like you said, 2850 is sort of where I would always put Magnus at. And fluctuations below or above that is more of a sign of momentum when it comes to his play. I think he's really proven that 2850 is sort of where he's at his normal state. Um, how is it for Karjakin? Because actually he sort of fluctuates. I guess it is between 2760 and 2790, maybe a little bit below 2760 even. Um, do you feel that his rating is representable for sort of the match that he's in, or can he play above that level?
I think a lot of his recent results have to do with the fact that I think he's taking the match extremely seriously. And we see like, he lost a game to Carlsen, obviously very recently. He doesn't feel like he's showing everyone his A game. Now that might backfire, and Carlsen could win the match, and we'll say, well, why did he play so passively for the months before the tournament? But at the same time, I think he is trying to hide something just recently. But in general, yeah, his fluctuation is 2760, 2790, but it's his style that means that you're never going to see him go much below that. He's too good of a player, and with this solid style and tremendous defensive prowess, he's really never going to plummet. His rating's never going to go down. But unfortunately, I think that means his rating's also never going to go very high based on his style. He's very solid, but that solid grinding style, able to hold a lot of draws from worse positions, that's not going to get you higher than your peak. So the way he is more like he's never going to go lower than a certain level. And with Magnus, it's more the opposite, that he can push the envelope and go higher and higher, I feel.
Definitely, yeah, I completely agree with you. The one reason why I see Karyakin maybe pushing 2800 at some point is because I think he's very well prepared, and if he gets, obviously, like most of these top players, if he does get the right positions out of the openings he looked at, it doesn't take much for him to just win better positions, right? But everyone is very well prepared. Actually, Magnus is generally very well prepared, and I want to get into that a little bit later, because I still think that there's some interesting stuff to say about the previous matches in Magnus' preparation. Um, but I think we definitely covered there how we can look at rating in terms of this match, and of course a match is a different format, so it's not entirely representable
Yeah.
of what's going to happen.
Funny
All right.
thing, Robin, I was just thinking, no matter what happens in the match, I think Karyakin stands to win a fair sum of points potentially. Hey, no matter win or lose, World Championship matches have a lot of draws, and Karyakin's a specialist in that area. So even over all the games, if he draws, 7, 8, 9 of those games, that's a fair amount of points when you add it all up.
Definitely, yeah, that's true. Actually, we also saw that with Vichy, where the rating difference was like 70 points or something like that. And I think Vichy might have lost a few points, but it's definitely not something that Magnus tends to gain a lot from because of
No,
the draws.
no.
So that's a funny little detail indeed. All right, so Magnus goes h4. Obviously, he would like to gain some ground with h5, which Black would never be able to take because of the f pawn hanging, which is more important than the h pawn, immediately creating a pass pawn for white on f4. And of course, h5, h6. If the black bishop has to retreat, and blocking the rook would be even worse. So Karyakin goes h5. Not too surprising to my mind. And I think a little trick here that at least we have to keep in mind is that if h6 is played, um, first of all, h5 looks scary because it loosens up this pawn. Also, it's not so clear if black really creates counterplay over here, because As soon as he tries to do something on the h file, for example, he goes rook h4, and he sort of hopes that white is tied down to this pawn. Is that the case? Sort of, but white can still create something on the queen side over here. Now, if you go a5, hoping to block everything with b6, of course, white's going to play b6, which simply isolates the pawn altogether, so that's not a good idea. If you take, the king's going to move up to b5, and at one point, obviously, white's going to play rook e1, and for example, rook e8. In this specific position, just to show how dangerous that is, I think white is more or less winning, because we see that the bishop's actually trapped.
Yeah.
Bishop g7, there's rook e7, check. So not easy for black to just hope that he gets active counterplay and can tie white down like that. It's not the case. So Karjakin goes h5, still passive, but at the same time, I wouldn't say that necessarily huge weaknesses were created. On the other hand, in the long run, obviously the black bishop is really a poor piece compared to the white one now.
Yep.
That's settled. So rook to f1, now switching back to maybe go to the queen side. And here probably Karjakin should have played king to d8, but we'll see why. He actually played rook to e8, and as we saw previously, now it's Magnus's turn to go for b5. And of course, this is a particularly good moment because black cannot even take the pawn. Still, I would say, and I think you'd agree with me here, Aman, that reducing the amount of pawns sort of releases the tension, but if it's this b pawn and the bishop gets access to b5, that does open up the diagonal towards the black pawns, right? So it's all very concrete, and it depends on if white is in time to, or actually if black is in time to set up the defense, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Now,
here,
asking
here
you
it
the
looks
same
good.
question again, how do you feel? Do you think this is already winning for white?
The move b5, it really strikes me as extremely strong. Simply because a5, as you mentioned earlier, is met by b6, which is there's probably just a winning idea. And if I take, of course, in the current position, I'm just losing, which means that I'm forced to like extreme passivity with rook a8, or I'm forced to do what Karjakin probably never wants to have to do, which is eventually I'm going to have to play rook e3, rook h3, and just sort of take that dive into like,
Right.
all right, it's a race now. And Magnus has created a position where it's pretty much forced to do that, and that's very impressive. So already as white, I'm very close to saying it's in the bag, but I'm willing to say that there's still a draw in sight, but I can't actually identify it.
Right. Actually, I think your analysis is completely on point. What happened is actually that Karjakin didn't see anything better than rook e3, rook h3. He started with king c7 in this position, and after Magnus took, he didn't want to take the pawn immediately because rook e3 check would come. No, he actually thought, why don't I move my king first? And I'm just going to try and take this, however I want, but I'm definitely putting my king on a5 because that's a good square.
Mm-hmm.
And in this position, Karjakin actually was like, I don't see what to do. One thing you might think, well, let's say the passive defense here would be king b6, right?
Yeah.
And now we'll check him. King to a7, king a5. And maybe you could still hope to play rook b8 here and say, why don't I draw the opposite color bishop ending? I don't think it's drawn anymore, mostly because I'm going to win this pawn, and access to e8 will be very devastating for black. But at the same time, rook e1 is even worse because the rook is getting into e7 or e6, and again, this g6 pawn is going to be lost, to say the least, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So this just shows that it's over for black, right? There's no more passive defense left.
That brings up a good point, because this is the type of thing that I mean when Karjakin plays Magnus, is that I'm worried that he's not going to take a chance, let's say 5-10 moves ago, of not playing the passive move and maybe playing that h6 move you were talking about. Just trying to get some activity where I think it's pretty human that not many of us can handle the positions that Karjakin demonstrates that he actually can time and time again. So most humans that we lash out, whether it's good or bad. We say, there's no way I can sit here and take this suffering. So we have to just get some offensive type of moves going, even if they're not good. But Karjakin has waited and waited, but Magnus is creating a position where he's forcing Karjakin to go active, because to keep being passive is now a very clear loss. And when Karjakin sees that, he plays this move, rook e3, like you're saying, but it's like, would you rather play this active move, or would you rather play the h6 so many moves ago? I'm not sure. I feel like maybe waiting in this case might have been, I don't know, live by the sword, die by the sword.
Definitely, yeah, I agree. I think the h6 move earlier probably promised black some better chances, although maybe black was already in dire straits there. Don't know exactly, but definitely this shows that Karjakin never wanted to play rook e3 and become active unless everything was defended, and that's just not the case here. We see white moves on with king a5. Of course, he's gonna go rook h3, and again, king takes a6, like nothing's going on. Rook takes h4, rook to e1, over the e-file now, and we see that, remember when Magnus changed that rook on e8, and we said, well, the e-file is not that important. It is actually very important, just black does have to leave that e-file before you can actually use it, and now 10, 15, I don't know, maybe even 20 moves later, we suddenly see the rook appear on h4, and it's white's time to use that file to his advantage. And actually, this is sort of the final blow. King d8 was played, of course, to stop rook e7 or rook e8. Not enough. Bishop to b5 now comes in and again renews the threat of rook to e8.
Yeah.
d3 is the last sort of try here by Karjakin, and I think a lot of players would be tempted to just take the pawn and then c, right? But maybe that's not a very good idea, because the rook would come in over the fourth rank, and probably you're still winning, but you have to be a little bit careful, because once the f4 pawn is taken off, also bishop to e5 becomes a defensive resource.
Yeah.
Of course, Magnus would never miss this in a real game, but also not in a blindfold game, so that just tells you that you have no chance, especially once you're in a match with him. King to b7, threatening mate in 1. He goes bishop to e5, but after taking rook to e4, rook to c1, d2, rook to d1. Basically, white's just up a full piece, and he resigned.
Yeah.
So why is this my favorite game? It's just I find it so scary, Amon, that I can hardly point out a mistake by Magnus. I mean, I have here and there, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe I would have done it a little differently. But can I say that I found an improvement while going over this game? Not really.
Yeah.
And this is blindfold chess, right?
Yeah, that's scary.
That is so scary. I mean, this guy's playing this position or this game actually perfectly, and he's not even seeing the board. So just to get an idea of what must be going on in Karjakin's mind, like, you're preparing for this monster, and you know you're gonna have to play some of these positions with his style.
Yeah.
Gonna be so tough, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm really curious, if you were in Karjakin's team, what kind of training would you, what kind of program are you gonna think of? Like, how are you gonna emulate Magnus's style? Are you gonna let him play against some very good players in these types of positions and see if you can hold on stronger than like in this game, or how would you even approach that?
The only, well, Robin, as an experienced second for a top Russian player, I can tell you that some advice that I would offer Sergei Karjakin in this match that he could definitely put me on his team for. Well, I would say to definitely stay away from the humans. Or sorry, stay away from the computers and really take a human approach. What I mean is, like, don't look at this position and analyze it with a computer, because it's not going to help. Just get people on your team to play these positions. Play blitz, right? Just play a blitz game against anyone on your team in this position, and you will definitely get an idea who's favorable here, what the defensive ideas are, how a strong player is going to push with a small advantage. And Karjakin just needs to get accustomed to, like, you know, all the small types of preferences that Magnus could have. And the thing is, you know, you and I look at this position and we don't see all the moves, but we understand some of the moves, like he played f4, he played b4. You know, you can get people, strong grandmasters, to replicate some of Magnus's style for sure. I think most players approach slightly better positions kind of the same way. But I think that's maybe the best advice I would give, is just try to take a human approach and just get a lot of practical games in, just blitz games, training games, whatever, rather than focus on evaluations.
Right. So, for example, one thing I was just thinking of, maybe a player like Tomaszewski, who strikes me as someone who would just love to play this kind of position with white. Maybe invite a guy like that and just let Sergey suffer for some days playing these types of positions is definitely. I don't think that's the most fun training. You know, if you're playing Ivanchuk or someone else in a big match, you're probably gonna have a little bit more creativity and a little bit more fun preparing for that. But I do agree with you. I mean, what else, right?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to get really, really, I would say strong, but also annoying players who just like to squeeze and make it harder and harder and long games. Maybe your blitz is one way, but also rapid games with some increment where it just keeps going and your head's about to explode because you want to just, at least most people would just want to do something and keep patient and at the same time, like you said, strike when it's necessary. That's going to be the hardest part of the match.
Yeah.
When does Karjakin have to strike in a somewhat passive position? And that's going to be the focus of his training. Um, I have a few other things, Amon. Recently, I read a news story that I thought was interesting. It was about Nepomniachtchi, who used to be sort of a second of Carlsen and a good friend of his as well. And I read like, oh, Nepomniachtchi has switched sides. He's now working for the Russian player, for Karjakin. Obviously, they must also be some sort of friends or at least acquaintances, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that could affect the match at all, or how do you feel about that sort of thing happening? I don't know if you read the story, but
I actually didn't read the story. You're actually my news source today, Robin. But
okay.
I can definitely say that something like that, in Magnus's case, okay, first of all, yes, it will have an impact on the match. I mean, anyone who gets that type of information from Magnus, being able to study with him, seeing how he works, what he likes, when he's looking for an advantage, like what moves does he play, what does he go for, that's all very important. But it would be a lot worse if it were the other way around. Can you imagine a GM working for Karjakin for 5 years and then getting into all his preparation and stuff and then switching sides to Carlsen? I think we can agree that it's probably less severe that you get into Carlsen's head because, you know, you can imagine training with Carlsen. He's probably like, I'll just go for this position, you know, and
Yeah.
it's not going to be too serious. I feel. Yes, you get into his head. You see some ideas what he prefers, but the overall theory and memorization and preparation you take away from him, it's probably not going to be that intense. I'm sure that Magnus, like you said, he works with people for reasons. So he had Jan in there for a specific reason, training certain positions. So I don't feel like it's going to have a major impact.
No, I definitely agree. I think that Magnus is, first of all, I believe that Magnus specifically is very clever about what he shares with his seconds. I really doubt that just because he worked with Nepo before means that Nepo really knows that much about his openings or even has some of his files, other than maybe the ones that they worked on together,
Yeah.
his opening files. I think he's clever about that, and he realizes he's in a very competitive environment where your friend can turn into your enemy, so to speak, anytime because all of these guys are young, they are successful, and they would love nothing more than challenging Magnus, right? So especially working with someone from his generation is tricky. So you can't just go out and share everything and be best friends. I also don't think Magnus is the type of guy who is easily psychologically affected by something like this. He strikes me as a pretty tough character. I mean, obviously he is due to all these great results, but also I don't think he lets the personal get to him so easily. So I thought the news story was written, as far as I remember, in a way that it was very dramatic. I don't think it's a very dramatic thing at all. It's just part of the business, I would say. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, it's definitely not going to have as much of an impact as many media sources would like to say that it will, because you just imagine Pomniachtchi could have been the challenger. It could have gone a lot of ways. The very guy that worked with Carlsen could be the next challenger, and Carlsen, like you said, he knows that. He knows that anybody that he even talks to at the top level that he plays with in all these tournaments regularly, monthly. These guys might show up as the guy who wants to take his world championship title from him. So he knows that, and I think it's mutually beneficial. You study a position, you both improve together in that position, but I don't feel like he's giving away, his files or anything like that.
Mm.
Nothing
Mm.
too serious, I think.
Right. Another thing is that what I find interesting, because obviously I am not nothing like Magnus as a chess player, I would say. Don't think we have a lot of stylistic, comparable aspects there. I am very inspired by him as a player, especially when I was. That's one of the things I wanted to say, Amon, is that when I grew up, there was this book about Magnus that Simon Eckestein wrote, his coach, right? It
Yeah.
became very famous. That was one of the first books that I really read all the way through. I think I must have been 10 or 9 years old. And since then, back then, people were saying, yeah, he will be such a great player. He will be such a great player because he just became a grandmaster. And then we didn't hear anything for like 1-2 years because I wasn't in the top chess yet. And then he appeared in Vaikanze and he's crushing everyone. And that was really great to see that, the expectations were so high so early and he managed to get there. But what I was really getting to is um, the preparation of the match. Now, if you ask me about openings, that's something that I can judge quite well, even when it comes to these guys. And that's the one thing I'm worried about for Magnus. First of all, I think Karjakin probably has the best team, maybe in history, because I think he has unlimited resources when it comes to opening work
Yeah.
and people who are happy to work for him, especially the Russian players. Also, I would argue that Magnus was in many games out-prepared by Vichy, but managed with his signature style and with his tough character to just sit through some of the more difficult games opening-wise. And also he took a loss uh, once very badly in opening against Vichy. Um, but versus Karyakin, that might be harder. How do you think he's gonna prepare for this match? Are we seeing an even more solid Magnus than before? Previously, he was jumping around a little bit in the openings and sort of seeing where is my opponent taking me and where do I sort of like what he's got prepared and where not. And he's not very happy to sort of get surprised. He's the one who surprises the opponent normally, right?
Yeah.
Um, what can we expect of Magnus now that he's facing an opponent who probably is even better prepared than a top player who already had him somewhat out prepared?
Yeah. Well, first of all, a lot of the losses, like for Magnus, you can focus on his losses because there's really not that many of them in his
Hmm.
professional career, and there's usually some sort of trend. At least what I notice is that it always usually has something to do with being out prepared or just being taken quickly into a position that he doesn't like. And when Magnus doesn't like a position, which is very rare, he's not always the most resourceful in that position. So he's very good in his own positions, and he's shown that he can get those like 95% of the time. But
Hmm.
most of his losses involve his opponent out preparing him because, if you're gonna pick a weakness for a guy so strong like this, despite being, where he is in the world right now, you'd maybe pick preparation or theory as his weakness, that he likes to avoid it, but he can't always avoid it, right? There are some lines that are top theory for a reason and have to be played. There are some positions he can't avoid, and I think that's maybe where Karyakin is going to put the focus in this match, especially with the white pieces. I feel like when Karyakin has black, both of their styles match perfectly for what Carlsen wants. That he's
Hmm.
going to get a slightly preferable position, and if Karyakin can maintain, as we're discussing from you illustrated in this game, if he can draw this position, like if this game goes a different way, then that changes the whole match. If he demonstrates he can draw those positions, then suddenly the whole thing opens up to him having the white pieces. What does that mean for the match? Does that mean that he's capable of taking Magnus where he wants into some preparation? Like you said, he has the biggest team. He has all the resources. There's a lot of people motivated to take down Carlsen, not just Karyakin. So
Right.
he's going to have a lot of help, and they're going to be looking to take him out in the opening because the longer game you play with Magnus, unless it's from a position that is probably strategically better, I don't think that favors anybody. Magnus is in for the long game.
Surely. And when it comes to specific openings, do you think Magnus still will prepare, let's say, at least two black openings against, for example, one d4? Or is it time for him to adjust his previous strategy and be sort of more and deeper prepared into one opening. I personally, of course, I hope he's gonna jump, right? Because normally that gives a little bit more excitement. Also at early stages in the game when there's some surprising and some perhaps even some unexpected ideas. Especially, I feel that especially when you open yourself up to different lines, you also get the chance of being trapped. But at the same time, if you have a small new idea, normally you're very safe, even if the idea with huge preparation isn't that great.
Yeah.
Magnus has proven that he can get away with that. Is he still going to try to get away a little bit, or is he really in for the long analysis and maybe still to his style where he's sort of playing slightly worse positions and then saying I can hold this, or are we gonna see Magnus jumping and sort of you know teasing Karjakin and not letting him know where exactly he wants to take the game, especially at the start of the match?
Well, Robin, you bring up an interesting point just with the whole jumping because it's very common in a world championship match that players will either jump ship on an opening that maybe they intended to use every game of the match, but they have a disaster result or they have a bad opening, and that plays a lot into the psychology of a long match. Is that if you get a bad position in an opening, you're not likely to necessarily repeat it, and if you go into the match with one idea, let's say against d4, you only want to play d5, and you're just looking to be so solid, equalize. If Magnus as white, let's say, goes for that and suddenly just gets a small edge that you don't want to suffer, 12 games in, that's the type of thing that's going to cause you to say, okay, well, hang on, let's go to my second option and jump, as we're saying. So I think we will see basically whoever's going to score the most decisive, not even result, but even having a draw where you had an advantage in a long match like this is a very big deal. It shows the other team that you're willing to play that again, you out prepared them, or you enjoyed your position, so you'll take that position again. That's the kind of stuff that you have to be careful of. Whoever strikes the first advantage really is going to force the other team to assess their openings and say, are we going to keep playing this? Do we want, is this what our game plan is? Do we want to play this for the next 12 games, this style? So I think whoever scores not even the first point, Robin, but maybe the first decisive advantage, the first surprise, even claiming an advantage, a decisive one, at any point during this match is going to be a big deal.
I completely agree with you. One last thing, is Magnus opting for main lines or is he looking for tricky sidelines? Because when I've been looking at the games that they're playing, it seems to me that virtually every single game, Magnus is not interested in the main line. We all know Karjakin is really, really well prepared when it comes to the sort of main tries, the main tests in whatever opening he's playing at that moment. Normally it's Queen's Indian or something solid, but he switches around a little bit as well.
Yep.
In the last game, just to, maybe we'll not go through the whole game, but just to give you an idea, first of all, I thought it was interesting. So this is the game, not the very last game they played, which was a quick draw, but the last game Magnus had white against Karjakin a few months ago. And first of all, Karjakin goes for Sicilian, which is to me already like, why? You know that this is your last black game before the match. So what kind of message are you trying to send playing the Sicilian?
Yep.
But then Magnus actually saying, okay, you're playing the Sicilian. You know what? I'll just play sideline. Bishop e2, c3, bishop e2. One of those lines. It's not bad, but it's definitely not going to give you any advantage against your average top player. What kind of psychology is going on here, and can we read anything from this, basically?
Well, it's something that you can definitely read into the more you look at it, but I wouldn't go further than saying Magnus plays this type of stuff all the time, and Karjakin does not play what we see here. This type of aggressive Sicilian, like you said. What kind of message is he trying to send? So it's basically Magnus saying, okay, you're clearly trying to surprise me or send a message right before our match, and I don't want any part in that. Let's just play another sideline, win or draw. Let's have that kind of excitement for the World Championship match. And speaking of the match, I mean it's 12 games, and we have a question from chat. Someone saying, 2K Hunter, what do you think about the World Championship match, Robin, being 12 games as opposed to previous World Championships where there were more games? Do you think that is in either player's favor? let's say based on the styles or what we've discussed so far, 12
Hmm.
games. Who do you think that helps, or does it play a factor?
Actually, I addressed this question in the previous stream as well, but I will quickly repeat what I said then, and I still hold that opinion. Although I've really been thinking about a lot of the things that I was talking about last time, because once you start talking on your own, you're just saying so much stuff, and you wonder if everything you said is actually what you really meant. But this is one thing that I would stick to.
Okay.
I don't like the system. I think 12 games is in a way not enough for me, and I would like for it to be more of a marathon in sense that it's 2 games rest day, 2 games rest day, and to me, and I also remember this last time I'm on when I was watching the games with Vichy and Magnus. Uh, I, as a spectator, just want constant action. I want to, because some games are going to end in a short draw. So if you then have only 1 game left and then it's a rest day, that really takes out the sort of momentum for me and the way that I just every single day I want to just tune in and be part of this. But when there's this rest day, that's annoying me as a spectator. So what I would do is I'd say, hey guys, you know what? Let's play a bunch more, let's play more games, less rest days, which is gonna be much more demanding from both players, both psychologically and physically. And I already said then, it's the simple thing is to say, well, hey Robin, yeah, sure, that benefits Magnus even more. He's in the best shape out of pretty much all the guys. Sure, but if players notice in advance, we might see these guys, show up with full body worked out, six packs, you name it. We'll see a whole different kind of chess because imagine you got to play like 5 match games in a row without any rest day. I think that would be awesome, but I'm just really looking from the sort of spectator point of view. I just want the most action. I want it to be as tough as possible on the players as possible, and I also know that quality is going to suffer, but I'm not necessarily at this point as a spectator. I'm not looking for quality over excitement um, that much anymore.
Yeah.
Um, how about you, Aman? How do you feel about this system?
Well, by following what you're saying, we might see doping become a really big part of chess. We might see some roided up guys. I can see some of our top players showing up, like MVL looking buff and,
Yeah.
contending. It's going to be a whole different world if that takes shape. But I would definitely say that it's really hard to answer this question because at the moment with the match, really it's so close, Robin. It's like
Hmm.
just around the corner. It starts to dawn on me every day. Like I'm so excited. I'm really like a fanboy right now. So it's hard to answer this question without keeping that in mind because all of my suggestions are going to be like, yeah, just make it better for me and for the
Yeah.
fans. I just want to see more games and less breaks. So I find that the more I think like that, the less I'm really appreciating just how much work goes into it as a top player. But without discrediting that, I certainly think there's a few too many rest days, and it just feels like when you watch your favorite TV show on TV, and now I'm not talking
Exactly.
about Netflix, Robin. Not talking
Exactly.
about Netflix where it's only 22 minutes or 42 minutes. I'm talking about when you're a kid and you're sitting there, you're watching Looney Tunes, and there are more ads than there are content. And
Yeah.
that's how it feels to me right now.
That's exactly how it feels, and I don't like it. I want to be entertained, and I completely agree. I couldn't phrase it any better, Amon. So that's how we feel about the current system. But let's also be honest, Amon. Maybe our thoughts are not necessarily classical or main or even mainstream when
Yeah.
it comes to how should we host normal events and so on. So obviously we're also going to have our own ways of looking at the World Championship match. If they wouldn't do it this way, it wouldn't really fit with the way that we have a lot of classical tournaments where we also have usually 2, 3 rest days. If you think about Vaikanze, I think there's even 4 rest days where it's not necessarily super high paced. Although I think it's harder when it comes to just the amount of games that you have to play in a certain amount of days. But still, it would be strange to turn a match into a total marathon out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But hey, that's a whole different discussion about how we should make chess even harder and more interesting. Um, Guys, we really like to answer more questions, so keep them coming. Um, right. Okay. One more thing, I'm on. people were asking this in the previous show. New York City, Manhattan, is that an advantage to either one of the players? Do you think location matters when it comes to matches?
Yes, yes, I do. I think location definitely matters. Now, there are certainly locations that may not matter, but not because the location has no bearing, just because it might be neutral to both parties. But
Okay.
even in that sense, matters because it's neutral. So I would say no matter what, it matters. If this was held in Russia, you can imagine like just how different that would be. The pressure on Magnus just going over to Russia, knowing that almost everyone in that country is sort of like almost looking down on him, like they want him to lose so bad. I feel like the fact that it's in New York, if it helps anyone, I think that it helps Magnus Carlsen. Um, just a slightly more westernized person in terms of the image, the media. He gives off a more personable vibe than Karjakin, and therefore, if a random person was to watch the match, of course they're going to be drawn to Magnus Carlsen, the guy in the spotlight, the guy who looks more personable, the younger guy.
Right.
You know, Karyakin has never been the best with interviews and media and conveying his thoughts to reporters and stuff like that. So everything just sort of worked. New York, the big city, it works in Magnus's favor, if anything. But I do think that it matters, and I'm not sure whether Magnus thinks about that. Like he's happy that it's there and plays a big role. But if neither of them are thinking about it, and it just has an effect on the match, without anybody paying attention, I think it just innately it would just help Carlsen.
Right. I had some different thoughts. I do think New York's a good place, but my thoughts were that location generally doesn't matter that much because I think most chess players are just staying in their hotel, maybe going to, I don't know, their local swimming pool or park to relax a little bit. But they're really in their own little world, right? So I thought it didn't matter that much. Also, interestingly enough, I figured that when you're playing this match in your home country, there's extra pressure. Of course, there's this feeling of, oh, everyone's rooting against me, but that might also motivate you. What I personally would feel more pressure, if I were to play a world championship match in some other universe. If it's in the Netherlands, I'm like, crap, everyone has these high expectations of me, and what am I gonna do, right? So it works both ways. One player can be intimidated. The other one can also feel too much pressure. So in that sense, New York is sort of a neutral ground that there will be fans of both. I do think most people will be thinking, well, this Norwegian guy is more attractive in a way. Also, Magnus, I think he simply has worked in New York as a model. I think he's had
He
shoots
has.
there. He was with the G Star stuff and so on, right? So I think he feels pretty comfortable having been there before, and I think he has some experience just knowing what New York, has to offer and how he can relax there,
Yeah.
in between the matches and during the rest days and so on. So I do think I'm actually going to change my mind a little bit because of what you said and say that it matters somewhat, and New York is a good location for Magnus to play. If you're giving me a very boring place, like I'm not going to mention anything because nothing comes to mind, but just a random place like I don't know, Astana, or some, I don't know if it's a boring place, but just sort of a random place, right?
Yeah.
That might be more neutral even than New York. So I think you're bringing up a good point there.
Yeah. You also
Um,
have to remember, Robin, in basketball, home team advantage makes a very big deal because I mean the fans can cheer super loud. They have those things they smack together to make you miss
yeah,
free throws, but in chess it's complete silence. So
yeah.
unfortunately, there's no Magnus fans who are going to be throwing things at Karyakin or anything like that. It's chess is a little bit more neutral with home turf advantage.
Definitely, yeah. How someone asked, how do you feel about enhanced coverage with some crazy cameras, 360 view? He's talking about. I didn't know that was even happening. Amon, how do we feel in general about just having a very clear picture of the players and sort of seeing if anything's happening? Is this something that really is it is it adding a lot to chess to be able to watch every single move of the player as they're playing the game?
To me, it makes like a huge difference, and I didn't think that it would, honestly, until I started to watch more of these World Championship matches. Even following not a World Championship match, what about just a top tournament like
Right.
Tal Memorial, like whatever? It's such a big deal to not even have the camera on the board, but sometimes just to see like Magnus's expression after he makes a move, or Nakamura's reaction after he sees a move. Just seeing different players like that adds a whole different aspect to chess. And I think it's something that only pure chess fans can appreciate. It's not like that's going to make a difference to, you know, a random guy who just shows up at the venue in New York and you know, there's a 360 view, he's not going to care. But for actual chess players turned fans, I do think that stuff matters a great deal. At least personally, as both myself, it does matter to me. And having the HD camera, the enhanced angles, everything like that, if it's gonna be there, I'll take it happily.
Okay. Do you think that they should even go further and force players maybe? Because I actually had this in a tournament once a while ago where one of my friends, Luke van Wely, he was wearing like a sensor to measure his heartbeat. Is that something you'd be interested in having as well? Actually, I agree with you that it does enhance the viewing experience, and I actually remember seeing some of the most tense points in the match with Vichy, Carlsen against Anand, and just being able to read from one of the players' face, like, oh, okay, it's about to go down, or like, oh, he's not feeling comfortable, and so on. So
Yeah.
don't be fooled. These guys have great poker faces, but once it really gets tense, you're gonna be able to read,
Yeah.
and you're gonna see the nerves on their face. So that's something really important that makes the camera, I think, such a great aspect. But how about the heartbeats and like that's not something that they can really force players to do right now. But would that add another dimension? Because I feel that we would know even more, right?
Yeah, well, I have two suggestions for you here, Robin. First of all, with heartbeats and stuff like that, I can tell you personally that if I wore one of those, people would probably think that I was dead. Because the fact that I have one on, I have
Yeah.
that paranoia of having one on that makes my heart beat faster than normal. So people are gonna think that I'm like a schizo if I wear
Yeah.
one of those, and no matter what, that's a very bad idea, at least for me personally. And I know that a lot of people are like that. When you're under examination, you react differently than normally. So it's not like people are gonna look at Carlsen's heartbeat and be like, "Oh, wow, that looks like a really high variance for the entire game." Well, it's probably just because he's wearing this stupid heartbeat monitor thing. But my other thing is, I'd really like to get. I'm actually thinking about investing in GoPros, Robin. So I
Yeah.
was actually trying to get maybe all the top players to wear a GoPro camera during their games. That
Yeah.
might be the next step for me. Maybe instead of heartbeat monitors, GoPros, and then like you get a really good view of each other with a GoPro. Maybe like a
Right.
personalized viewing experience. So that might be my next step.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty cool too. Yeah, I like it. I wish we could come up with ways without disturbing the players too much to even add more technology and like more aspects to that. But definitely, whoever was asking the questions about these high technology cameras being placed and so on, 360 cameras, awesome. Like the more technology is there, the better, if you ask me. Um, Let's see. We have people saying that Carlsen's going to pull a Fischer and not coming from the match. I think those days, unfortunately, if you like that kind of drama, those days are really over, my friends. This is a very professional match. These guys are not going to give up a single game. Also, remember the discussion we had about the matches being a lot shorter. Maybe even Fischer would reconsider sitting out a game when you only got 12 games to play, right? At maximum. So I think that's unfortunately not going to happen anymore. Um, what else? Where will you be watching the match? Um, actually, Aman, are you when something like this happens, is that disturbing your entire like day-to-day life, and are you just sitting watching the match, commentary wherever, like the official commentary or elsewhere, and that's it? Like that's the coming 3 weeks for you, or do you still manage to do something, in your free time, or when you're not working, other than just watching the games?
Yeah, well, first of all, even as like a huge fan of something like this, I would watch it in every possible second that I could. But
Mhm.
if I was busy, I wouldn't cancel things to watch it. I can say that. The thing about this is there's such good coverage. You you can
Yeah,
always watch again. Now, I would make every effort possible to see it live because
yeah.
that's the goosebump feeling. But I would definitely not put too many things aside to watch it. It being in New York, living up here in Canada, Robin, it's very tempting to just go down to New York and just see it in person. Maybe
Absolutely.
not just as a fan, but like when is it ever going to be held in New York or even in North America again? There's so much money in the other side of the world for chess and major chess events. I mean, how many World Youth Chess Championships, World Cups have we seen in Russia, in Europe at least? You don't have any top events really in Canada or recently US has been doing a great job in St. Louis, but apart from that, you really don't see top events in this part of the world. So I might be going down to New York myself just to see it in person. Get a feel for how nervous the whole atmosphere might be.
I mean, unfortunately, I'll be in Rotterdam, in Netherlands, so it's a bit of a flight for me. But if I were you, I know where I you could find me during that match. I'd definitely go down to New York for a couple of days and watch it in person. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic that we finally see such an event in, other than the Sinquefield Cup and what the St. Louis Chess Club does is great, of course, but just such an official big FIDE event as well, finally moving to the US, it was really time.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even think I've experienced any World Championship match or any candidates or anything like that in the US, and it never made sense to me because there's still a lot of people who love chess in the US. There's a market. This was really about time, and of course, New York is once it finally gets there, it's the best city to host it, right? Maybe California would also be a good thing, but I think nobody complains about New York, so definitely from Montreal, what is it? Only a few hours, 4 or 5 hours by train or a quick flight.
Yeah.
I would definitely be surprised not to see some like conference room, people sitting and some footage of you there, Amon. It
Yeah.
would be a shame.
Well, I'm gonna be walking there if I can't get a flight, Robin. So probably see me there no matter what. I'll be the groupie in the background with the Carlsen sign.
All right, let's see. Well, do we have any last minute questions, guys? We're rounding up over here. Um, I do suggest, as we don't really have time to go through it anymore, but this game that we just started with over here, this was actually the game Carlsen versus Karjakin, Bilbao 2016, Carlsen with white. Review it. I think you might even be able to find something on YouTube or something, someone analyzing the game because it's one of the more important games. But as I said, not my favorite game because my favorite game was the blindfold one that we discussed. Um, do you have any last comments, Amon? Like something that you feel like you need to share, or did we really cover it all?
Well, for the most part, Robin, we really touched on a lot of points and made easier by the fact that people in the audience were asking some pretty good questions, especially about the match, the longevity, how many games, etc. So we ended up touching on pretty much everything I wanted to go over. But just as some final thoughts, I'm really, as I've touched on so many times in this show, looking forward to the how the styles are going to match up. Watching a strong player squeeze a slightly better position is somehow it's like some sadistic thing. It's one of the most enjoyable things that I can watch in chess. Like
Right.
seeing an equal evaluation turned into an advantage. It makes me feel like I'm learning something when I can watch a stronger player do that. And
Hmm.
I don't even care if Carlsen is the victim. If Karyakin does that to Carlsen, I mean that's even more impressive. I'd like to see the possibility of that kind of chess being very popular in this match.
I completely agree. I'd love to see some very hard fought like Magnus trying to grind down or Magnus going through some real struggles in the opening. I just like like you said, I'm sadistic. I just hope that these guys are going to make each other suffer, and whoever comes out at the winner, and I do really expect Magnus to win this match. Um, I hope it's going to be one of the toughest matches I'll see, or I have seen so far, because I haven't even been able to follow that many. Now, last but not least, to round up, I'm on score predictions. Are we going to see 12 games? That's one question I think is very relevant. Is Karyakin going to go for the full right? Or is Magnus already gonna knock him out before the 12th game has to be played?
Yeah, that's definitely an important question. As we saw it most recently, sort of being brought up actually in what was it, Hoogveen,
Uh-huh.
with Nigel Short. This sort of popular recent story, just that when a match is decided, you don't play all the games, and
Right.
that was sort of recently discussed, and obviously very important here that as a chess fan, this could be over in like 6 7 games technically.
Right.
So that's unfortunate in a way. Obviously, if I had my way, I would love to see all 12 games. But to be honest, the way that I expect this match to go is a heavy amount of draws, and then it's really that who's going to be able to convert on these small advantages. Who's going to be able to use their strengths? So Magnus, is he going to be able to get his slight advantage position and squeeze against Karjakin, or is Karjakin going to be able to be resilient with black and then take Magnus where he wants him with his preparation? Um,
Right.
and this match I think is going to finish before 12 games. Um, I'm obviously predicting a Carlsen victory, so I would have Carlsen taking the match without 12 games necessary. Now, I'm not predicting a wipeout by any means, but I don't think that we will need all 12 because for us to take all 12 games would, in my opinion, be a very, very close match if that were necessary. And I don't think it'll be that much of a nail biter towards the very end.
All right. I'm gonna go with a different prediction. I think we're gonna see a 12th game. And not only that, I'm predicting we're gonna see Magnus lose a game in this match. I still think he's going to win, but maybe my hopes are up too high. But I think we're gonna see a 12 game. Karjakin's gonna have to win that game, obviously, and I think Magnus will get trapped somewhere in the opening. That's just my prediction because I feel that if it's not going to be Karjakin's team, then maybe I should really evaluate some life choices about the amount of openings I've studied and how important these openings are. So I hope that Karjakin will stand up for us opening nerds and show that even against Magnus Carlsen, uh, once you've put in so much time and so much effort into the beginning stage of the game, you need to get paid off on that. And I still think that if not Karjakin, I don't know who's gonna out prepare Magnus and who's gonna show that it's still very important and it could be potentially Magnus's weakness.
Yeah.
So that's my prediction for the match. I do expect a 12th game and I expect it to be very very close, closer than most people would think.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope you're right.
All right, then I think we're rounding up, Aman. I want to thank you once again, really a lot for joining me on the show. I think people were really happy that you weighed in with your thoughts and gave your impression of both of the players. For me, it was definitely a lot more fun. Although the viewers asked a lot of good questions last time, it's always more fun for me when I have someone who also knows a lot about the topic and who has some different points and some different thoughts than I have to add to that. And I already reevaluated a couple of things I said last time, so that was really good. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Um, the match is starting this Friday. So whatever your thoughts are about your political opinions and who's leading your country or not, uh, that should bring you some joy. Make sure you don't miss a single minute, especially of those first two games. Those are going to be so important.
Yeah.
And the chessbrahs are out. We're hoping to see Mr. Hansen back on the show, but I hope that Aman and I have managed to entertain you this time. And see you soon, guys.
Yeah. Thanks for watching, everyone, and really looking forward to the match. But we'll see you guys soon.